Do you know the history of your city and the people who have been involved to help make a difference? Stay tuned and meet the leaders who have helped to shape your city. Hello everyone and welcome to Reflections. I'm Valerie Starn. Joining me now is Mayor Al Ethans from the city of Stanton. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. We thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
We'd like to start the show with a bit of a get-to-know-ya beginning. And
okay.
So let's go way back. Tell us, where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Highland Park, Michigan, which is part of Detroit, many years ago.
And did you spend your childhood there?
The first quarter of my life, yes, I did.
First quarter of your life. So
Yep.
Then where did you travel next?
Well, I joined the military, and I spent 8 years total in counting the reserves. And after that, I traveled. My wife and I ended up in Saudi Arabia eventually.
Well, now let's backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
How old were you when you first joined the military?
Oh, 17.
17
years old. They took us in because World War II had ended, and everyone gone home, and there was a lot of openings. And at that time, school and I weren't the best of friends, so I thought I would go in the military, which is the best thing I ever did. And by doing that, I also obtained my college degrees.
And what branch of the military, how did that unfold for you
Well,
to
this
also
is
obtain
unique.
college?
I joined the Navy. And then I just got out in time for the Korean conflict, so they called me right back, but I went into the Air Force. And I served in the 10th Air Force out of Selfridge Field, Michigan. And I spent the rest of my career in the 10th Air Force. And I was very fortunate. I did not end up in having combat, but I got the credits that I needed to finish college. And so with that, my life continued on in a very favorable manner.
Now, you have been married to your lovely wife, Mavis, for 38 years?
That's correct.
38 years. Where did you first meet?
Met at an organization for single people, divorced people, whatever, and met her there, and on first sight, it was one of those things. I had been divorced, unfortunately, for a few years, and then I just saw her, and that ended that situation real quick.
Well, how did the two of you wind up in the fine city of Stanton?
Well, that's a good one, too. She is from California. That's her hometown, an area. She's from Minnesota, but she lived in California. And I met her in California. So I got transferred to St. Louis. From there, I went to Saudi Arabia. Well, while I was in St. Louis, I was away from her. We weren't married yet, and I just didn't like that feeling of not having someone. And so we got married in Missouri. She flew out, and we got married there, and then settled down, and then right away we ended up in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, working for the F-15 program for McDonnell Douglas.
So you had picked a home and then got up and moved halfway around the world.
Yeah, we moved, bought a house, and I was home in that house probably 6 or 7 months, and they notified me they want me to go overseas, and I couldn't turn it down.
Well, what was her reaction? You couldn't turn it down.
She was more excited about it than I was.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, she wanted to travel the world.
Wow.
So,
was it a bit of a culture shock moving there?
For her more than for me. Women in Saudi Arabia, with all due respect, are second-class citizens, as you know. And so, but the American women had to dress accordingly, and otherwise they were well respected.
Were you living on a military base, or were you out in the community? I mean,
McDonnell Douglas had a whole building.
Right.
It's called the Gosi building, which is government-owned. And we had a very nice apartment complex that we lived in. It was guarded by security, and we had a great time there. All the facilities had restaurants, American food, this, that, and the other there. So, and not too far from a military base. Now and then, people that were retired military that worked for us would bring stuff in that you couldn't buy in Saudi Arabia, like bacon, for instance. Yeah, pork is no-no. So we had a great time, and then it was a nice building block for us.
And that was 4 years, correct?
Yes, right.
At the end of that 4 years, were you ready to return to America, to your home in Stanton?
I wasn't ready, but I had no choice. Yeah, the contract was coming to an end, so came back and moved into our home, which we had hardly unpacked before.
Right.
And we had to expand it. It was too small for us at the time. So we added a room and redid the backyard, and we're very comfortable with it now.
Now let me ask, you just returned, you're setting up your house, making a home for yourselves. What was Stanton like at that time? What kind of a community was it?
Well, you know, I didn't know much about it. I did some research, and I found out there had been a city before, and I think it was called, well, I forget the name of it, but then it was disincorporated so the county could build roads, because it was all dirt roads at the time. In 1955, it rechartered itself into the city of Stanton. There was a congressman, Stanton, named it after him because he did the job for us. I say for us, it's for the city at the time. And so I moved back in. When I moved there in '81, it was Stanton and the roads were in, and I didn't know the background at that time.
Well, when did you first become more involved in your community? That was the early stages of you thinking about public service.
Well, I really didn't think about it. I sort of was told and asked to run. I used to go to the meetings, council meetings, and I complained a lot about small things. Now, I can't remember what they all were, but the city was not what it is today, in no means. We had about 30,000, 32,000 people back then. Now we're up to 39,000. So we've gained considerably. But back then, a lot of things that I felt were wrong. I used to go to council meetings and complain. I think they got tired of me.
Well, that's interesting that you were the person that didn't sit at home and complain. You went down to City Hall.
Yes, I did.
You sat in the council
chambers.
chambers.
Yes, I did.
Why was that important to you? Was it?
Well, I had to let someone know. You know, a telephone doesn't do it, so I used to go down. We're allowed 3 minutes to complain, and it was something that was not on the agenda, so I couldn't get any results at that time. But some of the things I suggested came to fact. One-way street. We had a lot of accidents on the corner where I live, and now they made it two-way with a left turn lane. We had enough room to put a left turn lane in there. Now there's no accidents. So that was my first act.
So as a resident, you're in the council chambers.
Yes.
You're suggesting things that, well, you describe it as complaining.
I complain too.
But you're also suggesting things that might need to change in the city.
Yes, yes.
And you're seeing some results because as
Small ones, but they came out.
So then what happens next? When did you turn that corner?
Well, neighbors, the council member, two of them came and knocked on my door one day, and they wanted me to get me off of that complaint list. So they asked me if I'd go on the planning commission. You don't have to run. You're appointed as a planning commissioner. There was a vacancy coming up, and having opened my big mouth all the time, I thought I'd better join, so I did. And I was on that almost a year and a half.
Well, many city council members start on a planning commission. It's their first,
they should. They really should.
A city commission.
Yes,
but the
that's
planning
right.
commission is often the doorway to city council.
It is.
And it is your opportunity to learn how City Hall works. It's also your opportunity to have an impact on what you would like to see shape the future of your city. What were some of the things you learned on that planning commission?
Well, first of all, budget. I learned about budget. I learned about safety, that some things were going wrong in our city. And the planning commission has the chance to recommend to the city council on most of the things that have to be voted on by the council. So in that respect, I wanted to learn the city. So I drove around. You know, we're 3.1 square miles, so I didn't waste a lot of gas driving around. But there are areas in that area that I didn't know exist. Stanton has horse property still today, half acres and so forth, and some people even have horses on it, but majority don't. So that kind of thing came to light to me, and I didn't know the Brown Act as well, which is a state, very important regulations you have to follow. So all that came together. It took time. It takes time. You just can't become elected and know everything. It takes at least a year and a half, 2 years sometimes, if you really want to dig into the fundamentals of a city and how it functions.
And what was your length of term, your appointment to the Planning Commission?
Well, a year and a half, and then there was an opening at the City Council. And I said to them, I said, you know, I don't know the first thing of campaigning. How much money do you have to raise? And they said, relax, sit back, We're going to help you, and we're going to do most of the work for you. Now, that's the council members that were on the board already. For some reason, they wanted me to join. It's because, again, I was still doing things in the Planning Commission that made them do a little extra work. So they got me out of that one. And I won my election. It was a nice, it taught me a lot about people, the election. I went door to door, and there's a lot of homes. You know, we have about 13,000 people that are registered to vote out of now 39,000. So we went to the selected people on a list that we got from the state, the county, who runs and who votes. So we went to their homes, door to door, and talked to those people. That took a good 3 or 4 months, almost every evening and every weekend. And my wife joined me, and I think she was the plus factor. Yeah, they would look at me, talk to me, and then stop looking at me and look at my wife, and she would smile at them and say, then she joined. She got into it too. So it was a big, exciting, but tiresome thing.
Well, and let's backtrack a little bit and talk about your personal life just for a moment. Now, your wife is supporting you. You're campaigning for city council. What is your day job at this time, and your family life? How many kids? And
yeah, we had we had 4 children. 2 were living with us, and 2 were not. They're older. But my wife and I worked at McDonnell Douglas. I was a senior manager at that time, and my wife was a senior secretary for a different organization. She didn't want to work in the same company with me because she didn't want me to be near her in that respect, because she felt uncomfortable. Because I was in management, and I'd had to do things sometimes that, although it wasn't directly involving her, but she was in another building at that time, it's just something that we didn't drive together either.
Sounds like a smart decision for a married couple.
Now and then I had to stay after. So it was safer that way, and we wouldn't get in arguments going to work in the morning, you know, and I thought that would be the best thing to do.
It sounds like a good game plan. It certainly has worked for you.
It worked out well. Worked out well.
So now you've launched this campaign. Your wife is by your side, fully supporting you.
Yep.
And on election night, did you think it was a sure thing for you?
No, 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 no. I don't see it. Some people think that it doesn't happen at all. No. I stayed up till 2 in the morning until about 70% of our votes had been counted, and I had a comfortable lead. So that's when I dozed off, finally went to sleep. You're excited, you can't sleep. I mean, how often do you run for an office that's shown on TV?
Well, these days you are checking the Registrar of Voters website and you see the immediate election results.
Yes,
but back in the day, you're calling the office, is that right?
Well, the television was pretty sharp. They would come across every, after midnight, they would start showing the small cities like Stanton, because they had Washington on there first, and then the state and the counties, and then the little cities would come across real fast. You had to really read it as it came across the bottom of the screen. And so that's what we did. When I got to that point, I felt very comfortable. That first one was a very nerve-wracking situation for me. I think I lost about 10 pounds.
And now what year was that when you were first elected?
96.
In 96.
Yeah.
And at that time, when you're first elected, now you've been in the council chambers, you've been a planning commissioner,
yes.
But that very first council meeting, describe that for us.
Well, I was the rookie, right? And so I was introduced, I got sworn in, and that was nice. I had my family there and some neighbors and so forth, and it was that was exciting too. And then you take your seat up at the podium up in front, and it's exciting. You look down at the people and you figure, I'm here for a reason. At least I thought that way. I'm here for a reason. Let's see what I can do with it.
Your colleagues at the time, any one particular mentor or fellow council member that...
Where I lived, because that was my immediate concern. And that one year that right on my corner, because of the sun coming down at 5 o'clock-ish, many accidents occurred, rear-ending. We had 4 lanes, no left turn lanes. And so you stopped in your lane, and you can't see, even today. And so the cars would rear-end each other, or a left turn car coming out, you couldn't see it. That was my first act that got through. They were redoing the streets, and I went out, talked to the contractor. He went to the city and found out that we had to be 60-some feet wide, at least minimum. It was 63 feet wide. So they had 3 feet to spare, so they put the center dividing line in. made me feel much better. From there, other things came up. We had sewer problems and drainage and water, and so we got those all fixed up in time. We had curbs to replace, and we did all that.
We're going to talk a little bit more about, or actually a lot more about your time in office, but right now what we're going to do is take a very quick break.
All right.
We've been talking with Mayor Al Ethans from the City of Stanton. We'll take a quick break and be right back with more reflections.
You have the time to give, you have the capacity to care, you have the experience to contribute. And your country needs you, one of its greatest assets. Americans whose lifetime of knowledge and know-how will make the difference. Take what you learned in the workplace and apply those skills to your community. Shape tomorrow by being a mentor and tutor for children. Make independence a reality for people who need assistance and companionship to continue to make their house their home. Make a difference today. Get involved.
Welcome back to Reflections. I'm Valerie Starn. We're continuing our talk with Stanton Mayor Al Ethans, and we were talking about you had just been elected to the City Council, and this is the year 1996, and things that you were initially proud of, but the next major step in your political career, 2 years later, you become the mayor of the City of Stanton.
That's correct. Correct.
Now, it's an appointed position from your fellow council members.
That's correct.
But it does carry that extra weight, that burden of serving as the mayor of your city.
I think the word burden is better than the weight. Yeah, much more. If you want to do a decent job and control the council, which is no problem because we worked well together, but you still have to be responsible for the actions of the council. And so you run the council meetings. You have support. You have the city clerk that sort of, I think the word clerk is wrong because that person is right next to the city manager. And so with the city clerk helping, prompting if you may, giving us advice. But when it comes to voting and making propositions for the city and to spend money, the mayor has a big influence.
Now, you've served a total of 4 terms as mayor.
I'm on my 4th term as we speak.
Looking back over the different times that you held that title, what were some of the biggest challenges for you?
Well, we had a terrible crime rate, and that was a big concern to all of us. And we have the sheriff. We used to have our own police department, and we had too many people leaving to go to higher pay. And so the sheriffs came in, and they guaranteed us X amount of people, and also they kept the sheriffs there for at least 2 years. Because it takes a while, even over a small city, to know the neighborhoods directly. So we got the sheriff involved, and what happened was, with the sheriff's teams that they have available to us, we sort of cracked down in some areas of our city. Now, we still have problems, let's be honest about it, but it's much, much less than it was before. Prostitution is never under control. It never has been since the Bible was written.
Right.
But we keep it at a comfortable low. We cannot stop it. No one can stop it. But we've done so many good things since that time. When I see the big difference in our city from 96 to this year, 2015. And we're continuing in that area. But we need constant support. This year we're adding a few officers to our budget and a few other things that are happening. We're reopening a very important area that we had to shut down more or less because of budgets in 08. When the bottom fell out of the state and the country. We're opening the recreation department again. We're adding some staff, a couple of people. We had a tremendous reduction in force in 09. And some of those people will come back, but not like we were. Modern equipment, technology has improved to the point where some things we can put on computers now, much more.
As difficult as it was when the recession hit,
yes,
and the years that it took to recover, how are you feeling now about getting through it?
We come out of it pretty good. I think we gained knowledge of things that we didn't know we took for granted before, and now we didn't have budget for it back then, and now we can understand how we can handle it in a much more economical way. And so we're doing that. We're very proud of that. Our budget is smaller than it was back then, in the equivalent dollars, I mean. So, but it's encouraging to know that we go to work to our meetings that we're in the black, not in the red. We did use money from our reserves. We had to, because we lost $18 million to our governor and the redevelopment agency. And that was a big thing for our rehab of our city. And now we're back on. So with this new budget that we have this year and our proposed budget, we're looking real good. We're looking real good.
What are you most excited about as we wind down our talk today? What are you most excited about in the coming months, in the coming years?
We're giving our citizens of Stanton, we're reopening some parks. We have bought, from the school board, we picked up 11 acres, and we're going to break ground this June. And that's going to be our premium park. It's going to be called Central Park. The citizens of Stanton got that name for us. We had a contest. And so come June of next year, we hope to have a big ceremony. By the way, next year is our 60th anniversary of a city. So we're going to have a little something in that respect too. I'm going to be mayor next year, but I'll be on the council.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we want to thank you for sharing your stories and your thoughts of the city of Stanton, and we appreciate the role that you've played in its 60-year history in making your city the success that it is today. Thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be back with more reflections right after this.
You can never know which pool safety step will save a life. Until it does. No matter how safe you feel, adding multiple safety steps can mean the difference between a close call and a call to 911. Simple steps save lives. To learn some new ones, visit poolsafely.gov.
Welcome back to Reflections. I'm Valerie Starn. Joining us now, our guest is former Huntington Beach Mayor Cathy Green, but even though you're no longer on the Huntington Beach City Council, you haven't slowed down. You're now president of the board of the Orange County Water District.
I am.
Welcome and thanks for joining us today. Let's start with the Water District service that you're doing. How long have you been on the board and how long have you been the president?
I was elected in 2010. When I left the council, I started serving immediately, in fact, actually concurrently on as mayor and on the water district.
Well, you haven't slowed down a bit.
I haven't.
Let's backtrack. Let's
Yes.
start off and learn a little bit more about you. First of all, tell us where you were born and where you spent your childhood.
My father was in the Army. I was born in Tokyo, Japan. So we lived all over the world. We traveled, we moved about every 2 or 3 years. So I've lived all over the world. I graduated from Heidelberg High. So we moved a lot, and nobody ever told me it was unusual to do that, and I loved it.
Was there a favorite place that you lived?
Well, New York City, Governor's Island, New York, I think. I think that was probably my favorite. Those were the formative teenage years. Yes, it was a beautiful place. We were right across from the Statue of Liberty, and I went to school in Midtown Manhattan at 51st and Lexington. So we were right across from the Waldorf Astoria. So when the Beatles came in, when any of the big names came in, we were there. Actually, we were kicked out of school and sent home.
Sounds wonderful.
It was. It was a wonderful experience.
And then what happened next for you? Did you aim for college? And I know that not too long afterwards you met your husband, so take us through that chapter of your life.
After college, I moved. I was a med tech. I majored in med tech. And I met my husband in Oklahoma. He was the president of a college. My father was his vice president. And so Peter came to Tulsa, where I was doing my internship at Hillcrest Med Center, and that's where we we met.
How many years of marriage today?
We will be married 45 years in March.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah.
What brought the two of you to the fine city of Huntington Beach?
Peter was offered a job at Golden West College, which is what he really, really wanted. And so he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I'm game. I didn't know you didn't move all the time." Of course, then we moved to Huntington Beach, where we've been in the same house for 44 years and never moved. So I guess I got all my moving out of the way when I was young.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Now, we invited you to talk about your time as mayor, but we need to mention that your husband was the first to take a step into public service.
He was.
And what motivated him, and what were you thinking at the time as he was motivated to run for public office?
Well, he was on the Environmental Council, and he was president of Amigos de Bolsa Chica. And so a group of the amigos came to him and said, "You know, Peter, we really, really would like you to run for city council." And being so naive, he said, "Sure, why not?" And never really knowing what it was like. And at the time, really Huntington Beach was kind of a company town. Unless you had the blessing of the Huntington Beach Company, you didn't often get on the council. So Peter was one of those that broke that mold, and he served on the council for 16 years.
During that time, that was obviously a huge part of your life.
Yes.
But when did it first become a twinkle in your eye that maybe it might also be a job for you?
It really didn't. I watched every council meeting, unless I was at work. I'm an RN, and at the time Peter taught at Golden West, and I was a nurse at UCI, and unless I was working that night, which I seldom did, I tried to reserve council nights to watch the council meetings. And I watched almost every council meeting, so I got very aware of all the issues, and Peter and I would talk about them. But at the end of his term, one time we were talking, and he said, "You know, Cathy, if you're not willing to put your name on the line, don't ever complain to me about somebody else who's gotten elected." I thought, well, that's kind of mean. But then I started thinking about it, and I thought, you know, it's really easy to complain, but to put yourself on the line is something else. So I thought, well, maybe that does make sense. So I ran, and I won.
You have two children together, so
We do.
all of a sudden now it's time for Mom to campaign.
Yes.
What was that like for you? Although you were so familiar with the process, now
Right.
it's your name.
And our kids were older and in college. You know, it wasn't the same as when Peter ran, and they were younger. Actually, it was. I had so much fun doing it. I had a ball. I really did. My husband often teases me that I have a capacity for fun and joy that very few people have, and certainly he didn't have at the time. He was too busy with other things. So I loved it. I liked meeting all the people and getting out there.
Was there one particular issue that drove you for a council seat?
There were several. One thing that we were asked over and over again was the idea that invocation had been taken away and was no longer a part of council meetings, and it always had been. And people had asked me, would you be willing to bring back invocation? And I thought about it, and I thought, absolutely. If nothing else, it would lend some civility to the meeting that were not real civil at the time. And so I was. When you go to Congress, when you go to almost any meeting, there are invocations. So I thought, absolutely. Why wouldn't we do that? So, and I did.
What were the issues happening, or were politically at that time? What was the political season like in Huntington Beach? We're going to take a break shortly, but just to segue to that, what will we talk about after the break? What was happening in Huntington Beach at the time?
When I first came on the council, interestingly enough, we were starting to have, there were going to be some financial problems. You could see those coming. The budget, of course, people, it was very, very hard to read, or at least for me. If you weren't used to budgets, they were hard to read. And one thing I really wanted to do is make that budget readable, easy for people to look at and know where we were going. There were a lot of morale problems. The staff and the council, I don't know, there were a lot of issues there. And you could almost feel it when you walked in. And I decided I'm going to change that. We're all a city. We're all together.
We're going to talk about those challenges you were facing right after this. First, a quick break. We'll be right back with more Reflections.
Because play might be the best way to fight obesity.
Because staying connected makes my family stronger.
Because a safe place after school can lead to success in school.
Because physical activity is vital to my health and well-being.
Because I need to make my world better.
Because playing team sports teaches character and social skills.
Because we need each other.
Because we need each other.
Because we need each other.
Welcome back to Reflections. We're talking with former Huntington Beach Mayor Cathy Green. Now, in the early days when you first took office, and we're talking about 2002, the things that were happening within the city at that time, over at City Hall at that time, what are some things that you wanted to see change and things that were important to you?
One thing that was really important to me is because I don't come from a financial background, I come from a nonprofit, I like service, and the budget was just frightening to me. And my first budget I looked at and I thought, what on earth? And I spent days and days, and my husband even helped me go through it, and I thought, oh, we have got to do something that makes this easier to read for just ordinary people.
Were you able to?
Well, yeah, but I had a lot of help. I had a lot of help, and I admit that. If Peter hadn't gone through that with me, and even the city manager and everybody else, I'm not sure that would have been the case. So when I was mayor, we hired a new city manager, Penny Colbraith-Graff, and one thing she pledged to me is she would do a budget that was readable, and she did. And I think it's still the same, so that you actually can find out what you're really voting on and where the money is and what we have. So that was a good thing.
Your time as mayor, what were the things that you feel you were able to make a difference? Because a lot of times you're in the council chambers, you have your priorities, but you need the support of your fellow council members, and you need things to go in the right direction. So what are some success stories, and what are some challenges that were more difficult?
Well, early on, in the first time I was mayor, was early on, and everybody said, oh, you've got all the experience because Peter was mayor and on the council for so long. You know what? There's a big difference between you being on and your husband being on, let me tell you, and we were very different too. But one thing I did right away is I realized all the strengths of all my different council colleagues. They had strengths that I didn't have, and I thought, you know, if we work together, we're dynamite. And so I think we started doing that. I'm an intensive care nurse, and you can't work in intensive care without being a team. And so maybe that's my mindset. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and so it was always a team spirit. So one of the big things I did was look at the council that way, that we were a team. We would work together and work on each other's strengths. And then I looked at the staff, and there were some real morale problems at the time for various reasons. And so I started going out to staff and saying, how can we work together? This is our city. And they were very amenable. And in my last term as mayor, there were some financial problems. And I went to, we were looking at layoffs, we were looking at some really deep cuts. And so I went to every association and I said, I really need help. Can you help me? And they said, tell us exactly what kind of cuts you want from us. And so I gave them how much it was from each association. And do you know, every one of them came back. And in fact, the police came back with more. And I went back to the council and I'm patting myself on the back. And then I'm criticized because it wasn't the cuts they wanted or other people wanted. I thought, gee whiz, we're not even in, they have contracts. They didn't have to do a thing. They could have said, I'm not even talking to you. And instead, they said, here we go. This is our city we want to be part of. And every association, and we've never, ever properly thanked them.
Well, it's wonderful to hear from you. So many times council members, mayors want to talk about the issues that are important to them. You're most proud of the consensus building.
I am.
And the teamwork that you were able to, no matter what.
I'm a people person.
It sounds very much like that. That's
I'm a
wonderful.
people person. All the big issues, Costco, we wouldn't have done Costco if the staff hadn't been on it, because remember, there were a lot of changes in that project. We had to keep renegotiating it, and finally when we had the deal, I thought, wow. But it wasn't just that we had Costco, it was how everybody came in to help and work on that, from planning and building, and the city administrator, and everybody could have said, forget this is too much trouble. And nobody did that. Nobody did that.
We just have about a minute left, but is there any one thing, a project or an issue that you're most proud of, that you had the most influence on, or is it just your time in general? What is your reflection?
Well, I have one issue that follows me. We voted not once but twice on Poseidon and in favor of Poseidon, and now I'm at the Water District and we are again voting on whether to do a term sheet, negotiating a term sheet with Poseidon to see if we'll buy the full 50 million gallons of Poseidon water. So I feel that that is an issue that just follows me wherever I go.
And that will be one you'll continue to put your heart into.
Yes. Yes, not everybody agrees with me, but I've always felt I've had an open door. People had my phone number. They felt very free to call. And I've always made it a real, I try very hard to listen. That doesn't mean I always vote for you, but I really, really listen. And then another thing somebody just reminded me of is I voted against the Beach Edinger project. And people are now very upset that there's so much density, and that's what I was trying to do. I appealed that. And two of us on the council said, this is too dense, the building's too high, there are no setbacks.
Well, we imagine you will continue to stay involved, not just as the president of the board of the Water District, but also in the city that you served so very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cathy Green, for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Reflections. For more information about any of the topics that we've discussed today, just visit your city's website. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Valerie Starn.